All right, so this week's Parsha is Parshas Bo. Bo means to come. And it begins, with Hashem commanding Moshe to go to Paro and demand that Paro lets the Jewish people go. And we're on chapter 10, verse number 1. Vayomer Hashem al Paro, God says to Moshe, Bo al Paro, go to Paro, ki ani hichbareti es libo, because I have hardened his heart, ve'eslev avodav, and the hearts of his servants. Why did I do that? Leman, in order, shisi ososai, so that I should place my wonders and miracles, bikirbo, amongst Paro. This one verse is packed with important ideas that must be discussed. Every pasuk is, but I happen to know about this one. But here's the idea. First of all, the question is as follows. Hashem commands Moshe to go to Paro and demand that he let the people go because I've hardened his hearts. What right does Hashem have to harden the heart of Paro? This is a fundamental question, meaning the very definition of being a human being is the ability to choose. We have a choice. It's called free will. The choice to do the right thing or to do the wrong thing. Every single day, we are confronted with choices. The first step is to know that we're making choices. That knowledge and awareness of our choices is the very essence of being human. Animals do not make choices, they act on instinct. They can be trained one way, they can be trained another way. Human beings could fall into a situation where they're also acting on instinct. They're going with their training, they're going with what their community says. But to be consciously aware of a choice that you're making is being human. Hashem gives us the ability to make choices. Thereby, not only are we human, we're actually like Hashem. We have absolute freedom. We could choose whatever we want. If we would not have a choice, then how could we ever be held culpable for anything I did? If you know for sure that tomorrow I'm going to rob Chase Bank, then I can't be culpable because obviously there's something forcing me to do it. You have information that I'm going to be forced to do it. So how here could Hashem harden Paro's heart not to let the Jewish people go? If after all, then how could Paro be culpable? It's not his fault. So the verse itself gives us the first answer. And it says, I'm hardening Paro's heart because I, Hashem, have a higher cause. And that is I would like to bring wonders into the Egyptian population. I want them to see who I am. And this introduces us to a concept that is first taught by King Solomon that says, Leiv Malachim Biyad Hashem. The heart of a king is in God's hands. You sometimes wonder, how could it be that a king acts in a certain way? Doesn't make any sense. We look at our own Israeli prime ministers throughout history, and you wonder, how could Arik Sharon, who represented, for lack of a better word, colonization, or occupying the mitzvah of the land of Israel, living and dwelling in the areas that we won in battle, areas that are part of Israel, how could he be the one to give back so much of Israel? It makes no sense. The answer, says King Solomon, Leiv Malachim Biyad Hashem. God has a higher plan, and therefore he takes away the freedom of a king because the king cannot mess with Hashem's plan. And here Hashem had a plan. He's about to introduce and inject the Jewish people into the world. And to do that, he's first going to introduce Hashem into the world. And to introduce Hashem into the world, he has the 10 miracles. He needs to do those miracles. There's only one thing that could stop Hashem from doing those miracles. If Paro says, get out of here, quick, get out of here, get out of here. So Hashem says, no, you're not going to let them go. Why? So that I should perform my miracles. Even though every human being has free will, Paro, no free will for you. Bibi Arik Sharon, no free will for you. Trump, no free will. Obama, no free will. They have some freedom, but Leiv Malachim Biyad Hashem. Sometimes we don't understand the ways of our leaders because they are in the hands of Hashem, and Hashem is operating them on a larger decision. Well, that's one explanation. Another explanation is very interesting, which is the following. that yes, it's true that Hashem cannot take away a person's free will because that's taking away their humanity. But sometimes a person could do something that is so egregious, that is so bad, says the Rambam, that the punishment that they deserve is that their very freedom gets taken away. And here Paro acted so terribly that his punishment was that his freedom was taken away. It could be that he could have said, no, let the Jewish people go. And Hashem would have found some other way to perform the miracles. But Paro's punishment is that his freedom was taken away. And now we have one more idea, which is a third approach to this question. That is as follows. Hi, Ellen. And this is a third approach. The Sefarno takes this approach. Ellen, we're on page number 301. The Sefarno says, if you look at the verse, it says, go to Pharaoh because I have made him and his advisors stubborn. So ask the Sefarno a question. If God hardened the heart of Pharaoh so that Pharaoh does not let the Jewish people go, why is it then necessary to harden the heart of his advisors? What was the point of hardening the heart of his advisors? What would you say to that question? Why did God have to harden? We all know God hardened Pharaoh's heart. Why did it says here that God also hardened the heart of his advisors? Why is that necessary?
Pharaoh's advisors.
Pharaoh's advisors.
I'm trying to think if your advisors, well, maybe so that they're all thinking the same way. In other words, that sort of group fake concept.
Okay,
That
so
everyone is thinking the same way. That
well, you are correct. That's what the Sefarno answers, but you have to understand the power of your answer. That Hashem had to harden the advisor's heart so that the advisors and Pharaoh should be on the same page, not to let the Jewish people go. Why? Because otherwise, the advisors would have said, get rid of these Jewish people. Pharaoh would have said, no, they're staying here. I'm not letting them go because Pharaoh's heart was hardened. And then what would have happened, says the Sefarno? The advisors would have won over Pharaoh and they would have let the Jews go. So the Sefarno says that, but that is a shocking statement because that means that you could have a scale. And on the one side of the scale, you have God hardening the heart of Pharaoh. And on the other side of the scale, you have Pharaoh's advisors saying, get the Jews out of here. They're causing us a lot of problems. And who would win? The advisors.
right.
Over Hashem hardening the heart of Pharaoh. What that means is that we see here how strong is the influence of the people that we are surrounded by. The influence of those who are surrounding us are stronger than any other influence, even stronger than Hashem's direct influence as well. That's what the Sefarno says. And that's the third approach to the question of how could it be that God would harden the heart of Pharaoh and take away his free will. And the answer is because he hardened it, but it's not absolute. There was still some wiggle room potentially for Pharaoh to make his own free will decision. So those three approaches that we just mentioned. We asked the question, how could it be that God would take away Pharaoh's free will and harden his heart? That's the very essence of humanity. God is, if we take away our free will, how could we be culpable for anything? We said three approaches. The first approach is that even though it's true that God typically does not take away people's free will, that's our humanity, but when it comes to kings, it's an exception. King Solomon says that kings, leiv malachim b'yad Hashem, the hearts of kings are in the hands of God because God has a bigger plan that he needs the kings to follow. And that's what the verse says. It says, I've hardened the heart of Pharaoh in order so that I could perform my miracles in Egypt. And it was, I've got an agenda here, and Pharaoh's not going to block it. And we see throughout history as well, the fact that we talked about the Israeli prime ministers, the fact that Arik Sharon could give back land. It's not something you'd expect from him. But God has a plan. It's not in his hands. And very often we'll find that the leaders will make decisions that were not necessarily what we would expect. And sometimes we chalk it up to King Solomon that says, you know what, it's Hashem's plan. We don't understand it. So that's one explanation that's given here. The Rambam gives another explanation. He says that although, of course, Hashem would not take away people's free will, but it is a form of punishment. And Pharaoh's crimes were so deplorable that he was punished by having his free will removed. And we said a third approach is that possibly even Hashem hardened his heart. He didn't make it like a stone. There was still some wiggle room, as we see from the fact that Hashem had to also harden the hearts of his advisors that surrounded him. Okay, so that's the first pasuk. The other interesting point about this verse is that Hashem here says that why is it that he brings the makos? In order that I should bring my signs amongst them. Now, this word ososai, so in the English, he translates my miraculous signs. Really, the word for miracles is the word mofes, is a miracle. And the word for signs is os, a sign. Os is a sign, mofes is a miracle. Why are these two words significant? If you follow the whole story of the Exodus of Egypt from Shmos through the end of this parsha, we find that the Torah mixes up the words. Sometimes God says, I'm going to bring my mofes to Egypt, meaning my wonder. Sometimes he says, I'll bring my os, my signs. And the question is, how do we understand what it's about? Is it a mofes or a sign? How do we understand the context of the switching around of the words? And one of the explanations given by the Malbim is as follows. He says that imagine if you were driving from Detroit to New York and you were very, very well prepared. You know, if it was the olden days, you'd have gone to AAA and gotten a triptych, and you knew every 50 miles, you're going to switch a page. You know what towns you're going to come across. You know the populations. You know the topography, when we're going to be in the mountains, when we're going to be in the valleys, or if you're on Waze. And sure enough, you know the road trip's going to take 9 hours, and you've been on the road for 2 hours. So you're just east of Toledo, Ohio, and you're coming up to Sandusky. And sure enough, you see a road sign that says Sandusky 20 miles. You look at the sign, and you say, "Oh, great! It's a sign that Sandusky 20 miles. We're on schedule." The sign is an indication of something that you already know. It just reinforces what you know. It's a nice reinforcer. You like to see the sign. It's comforting. But you know it's going to be there because you've been doing the maps and the trip planning since the trip even started. But then you could have a situation like I had when I was in yeshiva in Cleveland, and I took a bus from Cleveland to Detroit, and the bus goes through Toledo, and then it goes north on 75 to Detroit, or some of the buses could just continue west to Chicago when it goes to Toledo. So I was on a bus, and I fell asleep, and I woke up, and I look out the window, and I see a sign that says Eckhart, 50 miles, Eckhart, Indiana. Right? And I see the sign and I'm like, oh no, what's that? So sometimes a sign is not a reinforcement of where you are. Sometimes a sign is like, whoa, where did that come from? Like a wake-up call / like a out of context. Like, boom, what's that? So says the Malbim as follows. When Hashem performed the miracles in Egypt, there were two contexts. There was the Egyptian context, and there was the Jewish context. The Egyptian context was a context of predictability. There's black magic, there's some sorcery, there's some voodoo, there's some sleight of hand. There's some, we could do some tricks, you could do some tricks, but anything that happens, the signs that happen, we put them into our narrow vision of we did it. It's somehow possible to do it by man alone. And that's how the Egyptians saw all the signs that God did. And therefore, when the signs, the plagues broke the mold of what they knew, the black magic, the sorcery, or the laws of nature, they were like, whoa, what's that? It was a mofes. It was a wonder. It was Eckhart, Indiana, 50 miles ahead. That was the Egyptian perspective. From the Jewish perspective, they said it's Hashem doing it. Hashem could do anything. It's just another sign of Hashem's presence here in Egypt and his signs. So they were not a wonder. So when it describes the miracles vis-a-vis the Jewish people, it doesn't describe it as a wonder, it describes it as a sign. Because it's an indication of context that we already have. And this is a very, very fundamental principle that the Ramban talks about as well at the end of this parsha, where he discusses miracles versus nature. And he discusses the following. He says, and it comes up in the theme of Hanukkah as well, there's a very famous story about Rabbi Meir, who came home and he and his wife said, we're out of money for oil for the light the Shabbos candles, all we have in the house is vinegar. So Rav Meir says, no problem, light the vinegar. The same God that makes oil light will make vinegar light. And so she said, sure. So she put the vinegar in and it lit, no problem. And they had a nice, happy Shabbos meal. And how do we understand this question? So the Gemara explains it as follows. To Rabbi Meir, everything that happened is Hashem. You put oil in a wick and you light it, it lights. Are you screaming miracle? No, it's a representation of how Hashem created the world. Hashem's presence is in this oil, and Hashem can make the vinegar light as well. It's not shocking. Hashem runs the world. And that's why the vinegar lit. For us, it would have been like, whoa, how'd you make the vinegar light? That's crazy. So it probably wouldn't have worked for us because that would have just shocked our whole system. But somewhere on the level of Rav Meir, he saw everything is just a sign of Hashem running the world. Big deal. Oil, vinegar, it's all a sign. It's all Hashem. And that's the question. And the only difference he saw between nature and miracle is how often it happened. That's why this world is called olam, hidden. This world is hidden in predictability and cause and effect. But if you really scratch the surface in science and you ask why does it happen, cause and effect eventually goes away. Yes, you could say that the reason why ice expands as it gets colder, even though that's contrary to science, is because if it would contract and get heavier, it would sink to the ocean floor and kill all the ocean life. But how does that happen? There's no cause and effect for it. Oh, they'll tell you the cause is because some of the molecules start to expand right before freezing, and then you create air bubbles, and that makes it float. But why? Right? So the cause and effect is, if you dig into the cause and effect, it's not really there. So that was going on here. And another way to look at this same phenomena and throughout the entire Parshas, the three portions that deal with the story of the Exodus, is also that we find very often Pharaoh acts in a strange way. So, for example, during the plague of hail that was last week, it says that Moses said to Pharaoh, look, your animals are all dead, and ours are not. So clearly you should let us go. So Pharaoh said, I see. And then Pharaoh went out to the Jewish neighborhoods, and he went and he took a look, and he saw that not a single Jewish animal was killed. It's the plague of hail. So the question was, what was he looking for? He cared. Okay, what if 1 million Egyptian animals died and only 10 Jewish animals died? Then he wouldn't have been happy. It wouldn't have been a sign. It wouldn't have been a miracle. And the answer is that part of the difference between whether Hashem is doing it or it's being done by sorcery or black magic or some other injection of a disease, who knows? Maybe the Jews poisoned the wells, who knows? Pharaoh said that the difference is control. Control. So if it's an injection of a disease, if it's sorcery, there's no way you could say dead, alive, dead, alive, dead, alive with absolute precision. So Pharaoh went and he said, whoa, not even one? Not even one? Uh-oh, this is something I have not met yet. And that's what's going on over here. So Leman, here in the Pasuk says, now in the English translated, he says, miraculous signs, which is okay, but we're saying os, essentially the word os really means a sign. Mofes, which we'll see later on, is a wonder. But os is a sign. And so what's interesting here is that we always had the perspective that the reason why Hashem was doing these plagues is in order to show his strength to the Egyptians. They don't mess. But here we get a new introduction. In order to show my signs, that's for the Jewish people. Meaning that the point of the miracles wasn't just for the Egyptians, but the Jewish people should also know who they're dealing with. That Hashem is on their side. Hashem is capable of anything. That this is part of the beginning of how we begin to understand how is it that the Jewish people were able to go from absolute slavery to building their own nation. What happened to the slave mentality? The slave mentality went out as part of the process of connecting to Hashem. And that was essentially actually almost not that it was a slave mentality that was taken out of them, but Hashem is very careful and says, I'm not taking out of slavery. I'm just trading one master for another. You had an Egyptian taskmaster, now you have a God taskmaster. You were slaves for the Pharaoh, now you're slaves for me. And this element of slavery is an identity that we're supposed to accept upon ourselves. We have to accept the fact that we are going to be subservient to a master. Just be selective who the master is. Which is why we'll see later on in the Torah portions in 5 or 6 weeks when a Jewish person is sold as a slave. And after 7 years, he says, I don't want to go free. I would rather be a slave to this guy. Hashem says, what? The ear that heard, you are my slave, and now you want to be his slave, should be pierced. And that's why they pierce the ear, and then it's a slave for 50 years. So this is where it begins, where Hashem says, I'm going to be your master, and that's going to be ultimate freedom. Ultimate freedom is having a master that gives you ultimate freedom, that says do and have an impact on the world. So, and then he says further, and this is, why else does Hashem want to introduce himself to the Jewish people? Ulaman tisaper, in order that you should relate, this is verse number 2, you should be able to confide, relate into the ears of your children and your grandchildren, all that I have done in Egypt and all the wonders which I have placed there, and all the signs that I have placed there, via datam, and you will know, ki ani Hashem, that I am Hashem. And this is very significant because here we have the mitzvah of Passover, to tell over the story of Egypt to our children. Where does the story of the Jewish people start? It starts in Egypt. It's why when people say to me, oh, Rabbi, what's with all those Jewish bleeding heart liberals? I'm like, well, that's in our DNA because we were slaves in Egypt. That's where it comes from. It's a very Jewish thing. And this is where our story begins. We're supposed to remember that our story begins here in Egypt, and we have an obligation to tell over to our children what happened in Egypt. How do we know there were 10 plagues in Egypt? So sure, you could go to the museum in Britain and you could read a papyrus that has all types of interesting references. This is Yoni. Yoni, I'm in the middle of teaching the Parsha class. At 8:35 when I'm done, yeah. Okay, I love you. What's interesting is that when we say the Kiddush, and we have every holiday, we say, Zecher L'Yetzias Mitzrayim, God who took us out of Egypt. We don't say God who created the heavens and earth, and in 6 days made everything in the world. That's not relevant to us, because that happened, that's not our history. That's almost his story. That's something that happened beyond us. But our relationship with Hashem is the Hashem that took us out of Egypt. Why? Because the Jewish definition, when we say Hashem, when we say the Shema, we think about Hashem, we define Hashem in our mind. We don't just say God, because what does that mean? When we say the word God, we say God, the creator and sustainer of the world. The creator of the world that came about during the story of Bereshit, creation. The sustainer of the world, that's where we got an introduction to the sustainer of the world we got here in Egypt. And those are the lessons that we're supposed to take out of Egypt, that Hashem is not just creator of the world and step back, but Hashem is the one who's intimately involved in every step of the world. That's why when the mitzvah is to tell our children and our grandchildren all that happened in Egypt, because here we were introduced to Hashem's presence in our lives. Okay, so what happens? Verse number 3 on page 303. Moshe and Aaron come to Paro, and they say to him, so says Hashem, the God of the Jews, how long will you refuse to send my people to serve me? Because if you continue to refuse, I will bring tomorrow a plague of locusts in your border, and it will cover the entire earth, and you will not be able to see the earth, and it will eat whatever is left over from the hail plague. Whatever is left, the locusts are going to eat. They will eat all the trees and all the trees of the field. It will fill your houses, the houses of your servants, all the houses of Egypt, which a locust plague, which is quite common actually in Egypt, but this locust plague will be one that you have never seen. Your fathers and your forefathers from time memorial have never seen a plague of locusts like this. And then they left. That's it. They said their piece and walked out. They didn't wait for a response. They walk out. You can imagine there's a hushed silence in the room. And Vayomer Avdei Paro loves, the servants of Paro spoke up. And even though Hashem hardened their heart, they say to Paro, and Masai is a Mokesh. How long do these Jews have to be a problem thorn in our side? Shlach Hashem, send them out of here. Vayavdu es Hashem Lokechem, let them serve God. Haterem Tedak, Mitzrayim. Don't you realize, like Egypt is lost, like we were a superpower, and now there's nothing left to us. You know, I just was seeing on the news that Egypt, their tourism industry has increased tremendously. And a lot of it is because it is the #1 archaeology sites in the world. and a lot of it is around the pyramids. And I was reading that they actually found hieroglyphics that depict a story of people leaving Egypt, a man, a staff. There's an ocean falling, and then people die. There's a whole. I saw online because you see this. I mean, it's hard to know online what's made up, what's not. But I was referred to this site by a store by Ken Spiro, so I assume that there's some validity. I assume he knows that it was accurate, but it's some of what's going to be uncovered when we go to when Egypt when they're opening up all of these archaeological sites. In these caves, there's all these hieroglyphics that further seem to authenticate what we read about in these stories. So he says, so how long will they, don't you realize that Egypt is like where it has been? So Vayushav es Moshe es Aaron, they actually called back Moshe and Aaron. They were brought back to Pharaoh, like, oh, where are you going? Come back. And they said to them, L'chu, go, serve God. But who's going? So verse number 9, V'yamar Moshe. And this is like a very popular Hasidic song. We're all going. Our children, our elders, our sons, our daughters, our sheep, our cattle. We're all going. Because it's going to be a holiday. We're all going. V'yamar lehem. And so they said, Yichein, no problem, go. Go. Just go, no problem. You could all go. But only the men. They should go serve God. That's really who you want. It's the guys. They're the ones who serve God. You don't need to send your women, your children. And then they sent them out. They said, no, you can't all go. Only men could go. So, no deal. Verse number 12, Hashem says to Pharaoh, spread out your hands over Egypt, and the locusts will come. They will rise up on the entire land, and will eat everything that was remaining. Moshe spread out his stick on the land of Egypt, and Hashem created a very strong southerly wind that entire day, that entire night. And by the way, this is very typical. There are locust plagues in Egypt today, and they will be preceded by strong winds, which just carry the locusts, literally. And the locusts could descend even in modern Egypt and just eat everything. But this arbor was dense. So verse number 14 on page 305, the arbor came in the entire land, and it literally on the border. Very heavy. There was never a locust like this, and never again was there a locust so intense. It covered the entire land, so much so that it darkened it. It was like clouds. I saw this one time. We had just read Harry Potter as a family. Did you ever read Harry Potter? Mm-hmm. So they have those, what are the things that after a person dies, like the wisps, the black wisps? Yes. They're called the hallows? No, the shadow. They're like emptinesses. A word that, it's a great word, right? It means like utterly empty, like vacant, the vacant or something. What's the... Right, sucked out, right. As do we know. Anyway, so we were driving at night in the summer, and there were literally that exact thing we were seeing. I was like, Esty, what are those? Sure enough, it was swarms of like mosquitoes over every light. And they were literally like, they were long and skinny, and they were like waving like this. In one body like this, and over every single light. So it looked like 30 of them. I'm going on the highway. It was freaky. But so literally these locusts came in, they created clouds. They were like clouds of mosquitoes, clouds of locusts that darkened the entire land. So when that happened, verse number 16, Pharaoh right away rushed and said, Chatal Hashem, I have sinned to God, your God, and to you. And now please bear my sin from me this one time, and pray to God and remove this awful death from Egypt. So they left Pharaoh and they prayed to God. And sure enough, Hashem turned the wind around, and it picked up the locust, and it threw it back into the sea, and there was not even one. Now here we have that preciseness. Remember that the locust was exactly in Egypt, and when the wind came, it wasn't like you found one still stuck under the couch, crawling around. Not even one. because that was the key indication, was the control, the precision. And not there was like they never existed in the entire land of Egypt. They chazik Hashem was like Paro. When Paro said that, he's like, see that was easy. No, you can't go. And Hashem, and again, he did not send the Jewish people out. So verse 21, the ninth plague, darkness. And Hashem said to Moshe, spread out your hand on the heaven, and there will be darkness on the whole land of Egypt. V'yomash choshech, complete darkness, like a tangible darkness. So Moses spread out his hand on the heaven, and sure enough, there was a darkness in the land of Egypt for 3 days. No one could see each other. No one could get up for 3 days. And for the Jewish people, there was absolute light. So Paro calls to Moshe, and he says, go serve God, but don't take your sheep and your cattle, and don't look your children. But Moshe said, no, not only are we going to go, but you're going to give us more cattle to take as sacrifices to Hashem, our God. And of course, our cattle will go too. And we are not going to leave one parsa, one little hoof here, because we're going to take everything for Hashem. And we don't know what we're going to need, so we better just take it all. So Paro said, no, I can't do that. I can't let you take everything. So Hashem, once again, hardened Paro's heart, and he was not able to send them. And Moshe said, Paro, so then Paro said to Moshe, and by the way, don't ever come back here again, because if you ever walk back into my palace, I will kill you. So Moshe says, no problem. I will no longer come see you. So during the plague of darkness, we're told a couple of things happened. Oh, let's see. So one more thing. So verse number 1 on chapter 11, page 307. Hashem said to Moshe, there will be one more plague which I'm going to bring to Paro in Egypt. And after that, you're going to be going free. They're going to send you out. They're going to literally get out. But before we do, go speak to the people and tell them that they should borrow from their neighbors, each woman from the woman of the Egyptian household, silver, gold, utensils. And Hashem will give will make them say yes. They'll find favor in the eyes of the Egyptians, and they'll say yes. And they're going to give it to you. So Moshe, sure enough, commands the Jewish people and says, go do it. And sure enough, they did. And that's what happened. The Jewish people ended up leaving Egypt with a tremendous amount of loot, literally, because they went to the neighbors and they said, oh, we're leaving town. Could you have some gold or silver that we could possibly take with us? And they said, oh, sure. Well, journey, sure, take this. And they emptied their closets. They gave to them. It's a very, very strange. It's a very strange. First of all, why do we need it? When they do it, there's only Kabbalistic explanation. There's no simple understanding. Like, oh, because the Egyptians regretted that they enslaved them and they want to pay him back. Maybe. But let's discuss in a more Kabbalistic way primarily. One of the things that is described is that the Jewish people are going to be in exile. One of the things that we have to kind of have in our consciousness is that we are not currently living the ideal Jewish life. And I don't mean because of I don't mean because there's anti-Semitism in the world. But the Jewish people are meant to be living in Israel. We're meant to be having a time we're living in. Living in nice houses, nice cars, schools, schools, for a comfortable, making a comfortable living. We have respect. It looks perfect. It's not the way it's supposed to be. We are meant to be exiled, and we have been for basically 2,000 years, maybe even 2,500 years. We've been exiled to every single country. And our tradition tells us different perspectives that we're meant to have on these exiles. One of them is that wherever we go, we are meant to take what's called the nitzotzot, the sparks, the holy sparks of each place. So, for example, Germany. We learned a lot in Germany. That was one of the places that we were exiled to. We spent 200 years. We were emancipated in Germany. That was really where it began. It was a tremendous culture. Ultimately, we got that spark, and then it flipped off. And boom, they kicked us out. We were in Egypt. We got what we needed to out of Egypt. We were in Rome. We got what we needed to in Rome. Rome had yofi, had beauty, had splendor. It opened their eyes to a whole new level of building campaigns, like Herod, it's like one of the things that in this family mission that I learned that I was not fully conscious of is we talk about Hanukkah. The Hanukkah is the holiday that we celebrate the anti-assimilation. If we didn't see this as much when we went Caesarea, when you see Caesarea, it hit me the magnificence of what Herod built as a port. And then we went to Beit Shan, another Roman city. I mean, pillars and architecture and stadiums. And I can imagine if I'm raising kids in Beit Shan 2,000 years ago, and they're going to Cheder, and then they're coming home and saying, "Hey, Dad, we want tickets to the arena." What's going on at the arena? Oh, they just caught these villains that were accused of murder. They're going to put them up against the lion, and they're going to have gladiator games. Well, you can't do that. What do you mean you can't do that? Rome is doing it. Rome is the epitome of culture. That's what you do. And the beauty around it, it was magnificent. I mean, it was beautiful. And we don't even see the colors. All we see is the stone. And the influence of that culture must have been incredible. And yet somehow we had to say, no, that's not what we believe in. Would I have been able to say no if I had lived then? I don't know. I'm scared to think about that question. But I do know that wherever we were, we are supposed to take the sparks from that nation, and then before that nation turns off and we're off, right? Currently, we're in America, and the sparks of America are what's described as absolute kindness. Kindness to everybody, acceptance of everyone, acceptance that goes beyond race, goes beyond philosophy, goes beyond lifestyle. It's just an absolute acceptance of people and a giving, a kind give. And that's America. And that's where we are now. How long will it last? Well, if history is any indication, a little longer, who knows? Take it while we can. But it's not the ideal. Here, one of the ways that it's described here is that when the Jewish people were taking these klei zahav, klei chesef, we're dealing here, like we talked about, the DNA of the Jewish people. They're taking meaning literally. In Egypt, where's the DNA? They're actually physically receiving from the Egyptians the gold and silver. But this is footprints for the future of the Jewish people, that as they go into whatever exile they're going to be into, they're going to take their gold and silver. You're going to go there to take not their physical gold and silver, but the nitzotos, those sparks. And that's how this verse is described. That when Hashem took them out of Egypt, there were certain things that he did because they are going to be the harbingers of how the Jewish people are going to need to be in future exiles. That's one of the ways that this is understood. So what happens? Verse number 4. Now we get to the 10th plague. Moshe says, so says Hashem, at approximately midnight, I'm going to take the Jews out of Egypt. And there's going to be a death plague. Every firstborn in Egypt is going to die, from the house of Pharaoh, who sits on the throne, to the house of the maidservant, who is sitting on a grinding stone, doing her slave labor. And even the firstborn animals, they're all going to die. And there's going to be a great cry in all of Egypt, because the Egyptians worship their firstborn as like there was never had been before. But by the Jewish people, no dog will bark. A dog barking, the Talmud says, is an indication of the angel of death's presence. There will be total silence. There will be no barking. There will be no death. In order so that everyone should know that Hashem has differentiated between Egyptians and the Jewish people. And then you're going to come down and you're going to come to me and you're going to say, get out of here. Take everything, go as you are, and leave. And page 309, Hashem says to Moshe, at that point, Pharaoh's not going to listen to you when you give him this warning, in order so that I can increase my wonders on Egypt. So Moshe and Aaron did, like all the wonders that Hashem told that they should do to Pharaoh, and Hashem hardened Pharaoh. He did not send them. So here now we have the very first mitzvah in the entire Torah. And that is the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh, the new month. This is the first mitzvah given to the Jewish people, and it is to celebrate the new month. And the reason why it's given here is perhaps because this is going to be without the first month, without counting the time of the month. We have no sense of where we are on the calendar at all. So Hashem says to Moshe, go from Egypt, and to this month that you're going to leave on, this is going to be month number 1 of the year. And speak to the Jewish people, saying that on the 10th of this month, each person should take a lamb, and if you don't have enough people to eat an entire lamb, so get together with neighbors and have a family barbecue with all your whole block, and eat it together. Because according to how many people you have, everyone should be able to have a nice piece of lamb for dinner on the 10th. It should be a pure lamb, male, at least a year old. It could be a lamb or it could be a goat. And it should be for you. You should, once you take that goat, don't eat it right away on the 10th. You should hold on to it, tie it to your bed, and just keep it around until the 14th. Everyone should know that this is the lamb that you're going to slaughter. Why is this? This is also a very, it's almost like a Russian rebellion. The Russians, if you read stories about the Russian refuseniks in the KGB, they had like incredibly holy chutzpah. And this is what was going on here. Here you take the Egyptian god, their lamb, right? You know, the Middle Easterns, they don't take to insulting their gods very lightly. And so here you're supposed to take their god, their sheep, as a sacrifice, tie it to your bed, and keep it there for 4 days in anticipation of killing it on the 14th as a sacrifice. Now, it's hard to imagine which Jew would have the guts to even do it. So it was a test for the Jewish people who actually did it. And it also fortified them so that to do the right thing, and the Egyptians will not touch you. Trust Hashem. And this, again, is part of taking out the slave mentality. It's like, whoa, you're going to do that now? Okay, if you say so. Just keep it there. And that's what the pasuk points out. Just keep it there for 4 days till the 14th, and you'll slaughter it in the afternoon. Take from that blood, and that's not enough, and you should put it on the doorpost of your house, and eat the meat that night, roasted with matzah, with maror. You should eat it, and that's very much what we do at the Passover Seder. We have lamb. We don't have the lamb because we don't have the Beis Hamikdash, but this is the first official Paschal offering, right? Don't eat it raw. Don't eat it cooked with water. It should be roasted on a fire. And do not leave anything over until morning, right? We said it has to all be eaten. That's why if you didn't have enough people in your household to eat it, get together with some neighbors and eat it with them as well. And then in the morning, whatever is left has to be burnt. How should you eat it? You should eat it with your belts already on, your shoes already on your feet, your walking sticks in your hand, and you should eat it in a rush, because Pesach Ul Hashem is the day that Hashem is going to pass over you, and then also send you out of Egypt. And there are people who today at their Passover actually dress up. They put on a walking stick, and they put on their shoes, and they tighten a belt, and they walk around their Seder table. They don't eat standing up because they don't eat the Paschal offering, but they literally. They put all these props on. They walk around the table, and that night I will walk through Egypt, and I will smite all the firstborn, but I will pass over your houses, because the blood that's on your doorpost will be a sign that this is the house I should skip. Okay, and there will not be any plague on the Jewish people when I smite Mitzrayim. And it will be this day as a remembrance, and you'll remember it forever as a holiday, and that's the holiday that we have called Passover. For 7 days you should eat matzah, but on the first day you should get rid of all the chametz, all the barley, all the leaven stuff from your house, because anyone who eats anything leaven on that day, it's punishable with kares, which is, how does he translate kares? Soul will be cut off. Yeah, it means basically that like the person dies before 60, and their children, there's no descendants. So no chametz should be eaten. Ubiyom Rishon Mikra Kodesh, the first day of the holiday is a holy day. The 7th day is a holiday, is a holy day. In the middle are the intermediate days. The 2 holy days, the 1st and the 7th, you should not do any work, but except for what's necessary for eating, which is unlike Shabbat, which you can't even do work for eating. On holidays you could. You should guard these matzos. On that very day, Hashem took you out of Egypt. You should watch this day for generations as a law forever. The first month, on the 14th day of the month, that evening should be a mitzvah to eat matzah until the 21st day of the month and night for 7 days. Do not leave any chametz. No chametz should be found in your house, because anybody who eats chametz, again, repeated, their soul will be cut off from the Jewish people. This applies to the convert, to the naturalized Jewish person. No leaven should be eaten in all of your houses on Passover. All right. So that is the instructions that were given. Let's stop here. All righty. So it's